Hasta luego.
Resident Evil 4 is probably the most iconic and widely played game in the Resident Evil franchise. Leon isn't a rookie anymore, and the zombies aren't zombies either. Atmosphere. Despite the stark contrast from Resident Evil 3's bleak dead city to the rural countryside of Resident Evil 4, you still feel like civilization has abandoned you as you gun down waves upon waves of brainless villagers and cultists in the desolate locale. The game doesn't give you a lot of time to really appreciate any atmosphere, as time is spent hunting for supplies or in combat. There's this strong feeling of decay in the festering derelict houses of the village, the labs feel cold and empty, the castle is devoid of life, but the cultists just keep on coming. The music winds up and there's some frantic, stressful pieces that play as the enemies swarm in. In the later game, everything is abandoned as the combat intensifies. It's hard to give it the point for atmosphere. It's not like it isn't there, but it's hard to appreciate it just because it's betrayed by the gameplay, the cheesy dialogue and funny interactions between the antagonist and Leon, and just how badass playing as it makes you feel. Unfortunately, that's no Harry Mason's. Scares. Resident Evil 4 isn't really scary, the gameplay contradicts it. Whilst it's always possible to die, Leon is far more capable and maneuverable, being able to turn fluidly and shoot specific targets as he pleases, not to mention suplex enemies and do other wild moves. The fear of being overwhelmed isn't that strong when you can easily turn and run away or blast your shotgun into the crowd. The game is only as scary as you are prepared for it. There are some more intense moments, like with quick time events and exploring hostile areas with low health. Some enemies are incredibly difficult to defeat, like the iconic regenerators, which are only frightening if you don't know how to defeat them. Then they become just like every other slow-moving enemy. It's stressful when the combat becomes too intense, but it's not scary. Whilst the game throws deadly traps and giant monsters at you, it doesn't feel like it's meant to be frightening, and each new thing is a fun distraction, preventing the shooting from becoming too dull. There aren't any jump scares that I remember, and there's not really anything to be afraid of. That's still no Harry Mason's. Sound design. Going back to the sound, if this was in any other game it would be fantastic. There's these frantic drums and panic drones, suspended chords like a choir of people chanting, like fear will overtake you if you don't make it through this section. The savoury melody is melancholy and slightly unnerving, but the whole soundtrack is just so subdued by the gameplay that it's a waste. The sound effects are great, these ridiculous explosions and squelches of biological matter blowing up. The guns sound great too. That's one Harry Mason. Gore. Not so much blood as biological matter. Tentacles and proboscis reach out of things, insect-like claws burst out from enemies which are all mutated and weird. The goriest thing I remember from the game is if Leon gets his head sawn off by a chainsaw. The bosses change and mutate Akira style, revealing their less than human form, and some of it is really gross, but it's also really cool. That's two Harry Masons. Story. Probably the dumbest plotline and most funny turn of events sees rookie cop Leon Kennedy from Resident Evil 2 transform into Dreamboat Leon Kennedy, sent to Europe in Resident Evil 4 to rescue the president's daughter, who's been kidnapped by mutated cultists. After getting infected with the virus that will eventually turn you into a parasite-controlled cultist, Leon and President's daughter Ashley must find the cure before they're victims of it too. Each new section of the game has you face off against its boss, who spends their time taunting you as you mock them. You voice chat with your operative over the communicator to give you story updates as you fight your way through the game's locations. There's documents and stuff to pick up where it feels like the cultists just like leaving memos about what they're going to do to you later for you to find. The story's pretty damn entertaining, the dialogue is silly and it's hard to take it seriously, but without it the game would fall flat. It all adds to the game's charm. It doesn't take itself seriously and that's what makes it great. Making the final score 3 out of 5 Harry Masons. Resident Evil 4 is a campy, over-the-shoulder shooter with some horror elements. Ultimately, it's probably the best game in the franchise, but it doesn't stand up very well as a horror experience. There are other games that took its formula and focused it more on the horror, like Dead Space, but if you ask me, this is a damn good game that never gets boring. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool. I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I was laughing at Leon's dumb jokes, I did not scream like a banshee or run away from the computer, and I advise you don't either. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching, and always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.